Kinda hard to know where to start when talking about Five Nights at Freddy's. It's one of those series that even people who don't know give a shit about. It was the revolution of the 2010s for independently designed horror games, like their equivalent of the NWA or The Godfather, or Elliot Rodger. The games were made by this fellow called Scott Coffin, proud Christian and family man. Well, I grew up in Belfast, so I always had that instinct to, cross the street whenever I encounter a Catholic, but he seems like a decent guy. From what I can tell, he was pretty active in the fan base, which is cool to see. He authorized official releases of a few fan made games, and I was a Nintendo cuck when I was a kid, so that shit blew my mind. A while back, he got in a bit of controversy because he had some opinions that people didn't really like. In the end, he retired, which would be sadder if he wasn't already a gazillionaire from the FNAF series. I guess this kind of thing is part of the course when you have such a close bond with your fan base, and so many of them are the kind of mentally unstable teenagers who threaten to kill themselves over the Sonic voice actors changing. But I don't know, this guy somehow made 9 fucking games about Chuck E. Cheese's retarded nephew. I think he deserves some respect for that alone. So what if he prefers his cereal without milk? He created Springtrap. How many of you can say that? Yeah, thought so. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game was kind of a sleeper hit. Pretty much overnight, it became one of the most popular games in the world. A full year before Undertale did the exact same thing, and FNAF didn't have characters that made me want to kill myself, so that's one point to be had. A lot of its success came from internet personalities playing the game and recording their reactions to getting jump scared by the cartoon bear. This obviously made the game very successful, since these guys who were playing it certainly weren't slouches, and when the kings of the internet play your game, you're gonna get a lot of eyes on it. Problem is, this opened up a path for a lot of criticism about the game, usually focusing on the fact that it was basically a glorified jumpscare simulator without any substance. It isn't really an unfounded complaint when you see what a lot of the content being pumped out was about, but honestly, I still kinda like this one. Now, let me clear the air. I was a kid when this came out, but I unfortunately suffered from a degenerative illness known as being a little bitch, and I didn't want anything to do with horror games. I mean, I had sleepless nights over that one cutscene of a fella getting turned into a skeleton from Lego Star Wars 3 for the 3DS, so I really wasn't in the mood for the next level. Plus, I didn't own a PC or a phone or anything like that back then, so the most I saw of it was my friend playing it on his iPad when I went round to his house. Point is, I don't have some deep nostalgic connection to the series. I only really started playing when I was around 16, 17, so I'm not just trying to desperately reclaim my long gone childhood here when I say the first game is just all around pretty good. In the game, you play as this guy called Mike. From what I can tell, the Five Nights at Freddy's story is an absolute goddamn mess, and Mike here is possibly more relevant than you'd think. But I don't really give a shit. I'm autistic, but not autistic enough to obsess over the Five Nights lore. So for our purposes, Mike is just some guy applying for a job at this place called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Now, where I grew up, we didn't really have Chuck E. Cheese or Showbiz or anything like that. I guess the idea of combining entertainment and food just doesn't appeal to us enlightened Ulstermen. But I know that this place was kind of a big deal to Americans, and all I can really ask is why? You liked this thing? He looks so fucked! He looks like he sells heroin to school kids out the back of his rented Skoda. So yeah, setting a horror game in a place like this is kind of a genius idea, and I'm surprised it took so long for someone to do it. The game has really carried on this premise since it excels with the atmosphere. The character designs are all appropriately horrifying. I especially like this guy, Foxy. He's just a cool ass colour, all red and shit. And foxes are cool as hell. The series is kind of notorious for its long-winded lore, but the story here is pretty light. Most of it comes from this fella dubbed the Phone Guy by the community. Yeah, this game's fanbase isn't exactly the most creative gathering of individuals, depending on who you ask. I like Phone Guy. He's a cool dude. Then he fucking dies, in a striking metaphor for how I felt after playing through this whole trilogy. Basically, you're just some chode on the 9 to 5 grind, except you're being terrorised by a platoon of Radiohead fans. Also, there's been a string of murders. Have fun. There's also this event called the Bite of 87, and I'm not going to use that clip, because I'm above such things. In this case, the story doesn't really matter. It's more like set dressing that's fair if you're the type who likes to overanalyze Gorillaz lyrics. It's more about sitting in this dingy pizzeria because I'm grinding out my students' debts and trying not to get murked by Freddy Fuckbear. So how do you do that? Well, it's pretty played out now, but back then the gameplay was quite different for the time. You're basically stuck in one spot the entire game and have to fend off the animatronics while trying to conserve power. Each night lasts about 6 minutes apiece, and it ramps up the difficulty as they pass, introducing new enemies and making the existing ones more aggressive. We've got Freddy, Bonnie, my homie Foxy, and Chica. Bonnie and Chica kind of act similarly, but Freddy is more erratic, and Foxy has an entirely different system where you've got to keep an eye out to make sure he isn't running from the authorities. It's a pretty cool loop, even if you can blaze through it in like an hour. There's a lot of resource management to be done, given that your office has limited power, and it gets depleted by basically doing anything. This is a feature that a lot of the later games would just kind of ignore, and I can sort of see why, because during the later nights it can get real irritating when it seems the power is draining faster than you can possibly deal with. But at the end of the day, conserving your electricity to avoid getting swarmed by massive hairy weirdos is part of the core loop. It's like current day Britain. I think a lot of what makes the game special is it would sort of fly out the window if you remove the power, and that's not to say that the games have it removed don't have their own defining features to replace it. It's just that in this specific game, I wouldn't really want the system to not be there. It really adds to the stress and tension that this game embodies really well. I see a lot of people out there going like, FNAF was never scary, in some half-hearted attempt to justify the newer game barely being horror-themed in the slightest. And I do kinda get it, but while I wouldn't call the game scary, I would call it tense. The gameplay feeds into the tension pretty well, and I'd say that's what really let it stand out from the crowd. There's not much bonus content in this one though. You just get the custom night, which kinda sounds more impressive than it actually is. You just pick the AI difficulty for each of the 4 characters like you're at the fucking pick and mix at Omniplex cinemas. Basic stuff, but yeah, you know, it's fun. It's a neat little addition. Apparently Scott didn't even intend for the hardest setting, the 420 mode, to be completable. Then someone actually did it. Bet that was a fun dinner at the Coffin household that night. The mode doesn't add much more replayability, but it's neat to have, and the custom night would become a staple of most of the games from this point on, with the concept essentially becoming its own spin-off game later down the line. All of this was a way too fucking long way of saying that I like this game. I like it quite a bit. It's fun for what it is. It's the kind of game you'll put on with a podcast in the background on Halloween night. Big bowl of salted Pringles, good bit of drink. But there's a bit of an elephant in the room here, and that's that this game's fan base is fucking psychotic. I was scrolling through Google Images looking for some stock images to put in to accompany my witty narration, and okay, what the fuck? Who made this? Who gets off to this shit? This isn't fucking Aegis or those whores from Atomic Heart. It's a crusty animatronic from the 80s, but probably smells like absolute rat urine, and worse still, it's implied that there are fucking kids possessing this thing. I mean, who did this? What glowy was monitoring this person's files and thought, yeah, this is fine. Fuck you, I hope you get fired, asshole. You're responsible for letting this exist. Should have hauled them off to Guantanamo when you had the chance. Jesus Christ. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah, right, this game's pretty good. I'm not some big contrarian, okay? I'm not gonna mouth off about how it's some secret masterpiece that everyone brushed off because of its psychotic fanbase. It's like Outlast, really. If you like a couple hours on a thrill ride but you're not gonna go on again for another 5 years, it's probably a decent investment of time. There are worse things you could be doing with £4 and a quarter as many hours. And it turns out a lot of people thought this because the game absolutely exploded in popularity. Like I said, everybody knows what Five Nights at Freddy's is. So Scott Coffin opened his bank account one day and realised he'd made about $800 billion, which is probably what convinced him to make a sequel. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 was more or less what you would expect from a FNAF sequel, although it did kickstart the trend of spooky teasers leading up to the game's release, published on Scott's website, like this one with Bonnie and his metrosexual cousin. It was interesting seeing how it all led up to the final product, hinting at new characters and gameplay mechanics, and for later games, even a little bit of lore. We had these new versions of the original gang called the Toys. Jesus Christ, Scott, what, is Purple Guy a sex offender? Speaking of, Purple Guy's a thing in this game. A new character introduced to the saga, he's most renowned for being the guy who fucking did it. Yeah, this was the game where the story really started being a major focus of the series. And, you know, that's fine. I mean, I'm a Ready or Not fan. I dig bits of hidden storytelling and lore scattered around. But some people started taking this shit really fucking seriously. Game Theory has made a series longer than One Piece dedicated to talking about the story, and I think that's probably a pretty good sign that you've gone a little overboard. People got really passionate about putting together the hidden lore of the games from this point on, and that's cool and all, but it kind of got a bit out of hand. The first game theory video was trying to link the lore to some real-life Randy Stair knockoff, and that's just an inherently funny statement to me. It's all a little bit gay, if you ask me, but it is what it is. Let people have their fun, and I'll have mine. But that said, what actually is the story of this game? It's alright. It builds on the sparse foundations of the first one and gives things a little more depth, honing in on the missing children subplot a lot more. Like the first one, it's mostly told through context clues like some of the subtext to Phone Guy's dialogue and secret minigames that occasionally trigger upon death. It's bare bones, but it's vague enough to keep people invested for the most part. A lot of the pieces here are just that, pieces. Most of them were either solved with later games or abandoned faster than my newborn daughter. All we really get is that this fella, the purple guy, had a trip and murdered 6 kids. Some of these deaths are implied to be happening at the same time as the main gameplay, while others probably took place in the past. Also, this game is like a whole prequel to the first one. It's a simple but adequate little tale to generate intrigue, but how's the game itself? Well, it's definitely a lot more chaotic than the first entry. We go from 4 enemies to fucking 10, which is a bit of a leap. You are eased into it though, with the first couple of nights only having a few active, before more and more of them start coming to life towards the end. We've got the original 4 guys in a more decayed state, brand new versions of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, a transgender Foxy, good for her, and this lanky puppet fella, and a special needs kid who fell off the bus and landed in Fazbear's Pizza. Quite a few guys to deal with, as you can tell. So how do you deal with them? Well, for this game, the power system has more or less been completely removed, with you only having to worry about your torch's battery this time around. No doors, and the cameras apparently decided to lose all their power efficiency between 2 and 1. Instead, you've got a big open hallway and 2 vents to the side. With no doors, the only means of defense you have for most of them is slipping on a mask that makes you look like them, I guess? I don't know, doesn't make sense to me. I know the animatronics are possessed by kids, but are they, like, retarded too? I think there's a pretty noticeable difference between a 7-foot tall monstrosity and some fleshy knob end wearing the face of one of them. But who knows? It does the job, I guess. Mostly. Because then we've got my homie Foxy, and he's got an extremely important ability called not being a total moron. The mask doesn't fool him with his superior intellect. The Torch will, though, so he's basically upgraded from a Redditor to an Anon in terms of intelligence. It's all about the little steps. You follow in the footsteps of our Lord towards him for a couple seconds and you're all, oops, never mind, because guess what? Fuck you. This little bastard got into the office and suddenly I'm too much of a pussy to use my torch. And of course he's having the time of his life. You're gonna get me killed, you little asshole. I can see why no one came looking for you after you fell off that bus. I can't really give him all the blame though, because how come my guy just can't use his torch because there's a special needs kid standing there? Is he scared of getting a discrimination lawsuit for blinding him? Shit set in the 80s. Nobody gave a fuck what happened to the disabled back then. Pushing wheelchair bound old people down the stairs was an Olympic sport at the time. I've seen a lot of people say that he takes your batteries, but that's just wrong. Okay, so here we are on the most reliable form of research on the internet, Google's YouTube search. So let's see what we've got here. Yeah, this seems good enough.
Fucking quiz!
Trying to get my hands on his sweet, succulent AA batteries.
Yeah, well, riddle me this, nerdlinger. If he really steals my batteries, then why the fuck does he just give them back when he leaves again? Has he got autism too and just likes playing with them? But anyway, Foxy in combination with the little prick is one of the reasons you can't just use the mask constantly. The other is the puppet. Aside from looking like every horror movie antagonist imaginable, he sits in his little box in Prize Corner. You've got to keep the box wind up or else he breaks free, and once he's loose there ain't no stopping him, like the animatronic form of toothpaste. Keeping his music box wound up is kind of a pain in the ass, but like Foxy in the first game, there's not a whole lot of reason to use any camera other than the one with the music boxes on, so it's really less stressful than it sounds. Honestly, I kind of get the impression that he's only there in the first place so that the camera system isn't completely irrelevant, because you don't really need it to counter any of the other guys, since you can shine your light in the hallway and vents to detect pretty much any immediate threat. Foxy and Oral P aside, everyone else you just slip the mask on and Bob's your uncle. Doesn't sound that bad, but the amount of animatronics really makes it the most chaotic game in the series that I've played so far. There are a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong, and on the later nights, the slightest slip-up can really fuck you over. It can get pretty unforgiving, but that's fine by me. I mean, if anything, the first game was a little too easy for my tastes. This one's also got a custom night, and it's much of the same just with more characters. Despite not having much more content, something about this game really feels a lot more packed than the first. It's probably because of the secret characters and the minigames, but I don't know, I'm not a game developer, I'm just a dickhead with a shitty microphone, so I can't exactly put my finger on it, but it just feels bigger. That's a pretty good way of summing the game up as a whole. While still relatively basic, it's bigger and more ambitious in regards, and I think that's why it's considered a fan favourite. Is it mine? Not really. In fact, it's probably my least favourite of the games I'm looking at today, but it's still a good bit of fun. It's definitely the most dense of the trilogy, and as a result, kinda feels like the most missed potential. There are all these characters, but all but two of them you ward off in basically the exact same way. Even Foxy and Oral P, the two most unique characters, kind of feel like they're just there to cockblock you from using one strategy the entire game, as opposed to adding any real natural depth. It feels like it was rushed out to meet demand, though, which, given the release date, it was. Still, though, there's a lot to like if you enjoyed the first game, since the core concept is preserved and it retains that stressful atmosphere that really made the game stand out. As I said before, it's my least favourite of its trilogy, but that doesn't make it bad by any means. But yeah, this is a trilogy. Was a trilogy, at least. See, when teasers started appearing for the third game, I think a lot of people were starting to get a little sick of it, and this probably reflected in the reaction to FNAF 3 as a whole. It's often considered the weakest mainline game in the series, which, given what I've seen of Security Breach, shouldn't be legal if you ask me. But I get it, because it came out fucking 4 months later, again! What the fuck, Scott? If Duke Nukem Forever was a game reviewer in the late 2000s, this series would be its evil alter ego that it fights. No wonder people are getting tired of this shit. And this isn't even the last time it happened. Sort it out. A consistent theme with these games, or one that I noticed at least, is that you can really see the short development cycle and how it affected the sequels. I feel like Scott was being suffocated under the weight of expectations and felt that he constantly had to deliver. And, I can get that. I may be revealing my power level a little here, but I used to write fan fictions online, and for some godforsaken reason, people actually read them. When you've got a lot of public eyes on your passion project, you can really struggle under the weight of expectations and feel like you've got to give people what they want as soon as possible, or they'll go away and leave you with nothing. In the end, it can really impact a product's end quality. And I think that's a shame because, jank aside, FNAF 3 might be my favourite of the trilogy. Okay, I'm not going to say it's a hidden gem that is overhated in the community, because it has a lot of problems. But there are plenty of games out there that I can still really appreciate, warts and all, and this is one of them. FNAF 3 flashes us forward to the future. The Steam page says it's set 30 years after the first game, which is generally agreed as being set in 1993, so that puts us in 2023. It was the future when the game came out, I guess. As it turns out, having children and staff die on your premises is a pretty good way to spoil your goodwill, and the company behind Fazbear's Pizza went tits up sometime after the first game. Now in 2023, some chodes have bought the place and props and made a haunted house out of it. It's not the worst idea, but I don't know, it seems a little in poor taste. I mean, I'm no fun police, alright, I'm not a Johnny, but I don't know, people actually died, and it seems a little off to make a spooky ghost ride based on that. Be like if I made the Bloody Sunday themed Helter Skelter that took you on a ride through the park. Note to self: secure funding for Helter Skelter and buckets of fake blood. Nah, I'm riffing on it, but I do like the premise. It takes things in a slightly different direction from the scenario seen in the last two games. In fact, this one feels different in a lot of ways. For one, there's only one foe in the whole game, this fella, Springtrap. I really like this guy. The mixture of decaying mechanical parts and rotting flesh really gives him this uncanny look, and even the way he stands is just so different from any other character we've seen up to this point. It's a super neat design, and it's no wonder he became such an iconic character, basically superseding Freddy as the new series mascot. I just hope the magic isn't ruined in any potential later appearances.
Fuck off!
Earlier, I said this guy's the only enemy in the game, and that's sorta true, with a big stonking asterisk in place. He's the only enemy who can actually kill you, but there are a fair few other guys hanging around. They're called the Phantoms. They're just recolors of older characters' designs for the most part, which is kind of disappointing, but not as disappointing as their actual role in the gameplay. Triggering them just fucks with your vision a bit, or buggers up one of the maintenance sectors. Speaking of, that's one of the game's new mechanics. You've got a maintenance panel to deal with, audio, visual, and ventilation malfunctions. Most of these things are pretty vital to stopping Springtrap, so in spite of being disappointing and lame, I do kinda like how the Phantoms feed back into the one actual enemy. The audio refers to your audio alert, which is basically your main way of keeping Springtrap away from you, while the video affects your ability to view the cameras, keeping track of Springtrap, and the ventilation. I don't know if it does anything more, but all I really notice is that it fucks up your screen and makes it a pain in the ass to see. These things falter and you've got to repair them through the maintenance panel. I like the risk reward aspect, where choosing to repair everything at once is faster than one at a time, but it can also lead to you wasting your time unnecessarily if there are things you don't have to repair, since you're open to attack during the repair process. It's a fun little balancing act. The audio alert mechanic in particular I also really like. I kind of see it like the cooler older brother of the music box from the last game. It once again provides a use for the cameras, and since you've got no doors or mask this time, you really have to use the lure or else you're fucked. I'm also pretty sure it's based on proximity, so if Springtrap's right up close to your office, you can't just spam the lure on the furthest camera from you. You've got to lead him back through every camera to get there. Then, if he gets into the air vents, you really have to start paying attention to seal them off before he reaches you. It's definitely the easiest game in the trilogy, but this mechanic, while juggling your equipment failing on you, actually makes it the most engaging, despite the lack of difficulty, even when compared to previous games. You can't just camp one or two cameras this time, you really have to keep your eye out. Doesn't help that this spring trap is pretty well hidden on some of these places. This game also brings back the minigame mechanics from the second game, though they're a bit different now. This time around, there are two different types, one between each night and the others that you need to solve little puzzles during the main nights to unlock. The latter also has an impact on which ending you get, which would be pretty neat if it wasn't for how bullshit some of these are to not just trigger, but you actually complete in just the right way. I don't really hate it that much, though. It adds to the mystery of the game, like you're unraveling a grand conspiracy. The FNAF story really works when it's obscured and a little bit, you know, not fleshed out. Even if it's still incredibly basic, this is clearly the most fleshed out story in the trilogy, with the between night minigames telling a relatively clear narrative. They follow Purple Guy dismantling the old animatronics, presumably around the time of the first game, and in the final one, he jumps into the Golden Bonnie suit to defend himself from the now extremely miffed Radiohead fans, but he ends up being crushed under the weight of the suit. This ends with the revelation that Purple Guy is Springtrap. I really like that. It's neat that I actually get to fight the big bad of the series this time, even if his true identity isn't made clear until the end. Now, no, it isn't a perfect story, okay? The guy we play as still has virtually no input in the plot aside from killing Springtrap at the end, and it's still super simple and basic. But it's easily my favourite story of all the games I've played. I'm not fucking Marlo, okay? I'm not going to make a 6-hour video on why the FNAF story doesn't make much sense in the grand scheme of things. It's a fun little ghost story, and over the course of writing this script, I was actually kind of inspired to think for myself and piece together my own interpretation of the lore. Of course, I'd have to be a real spurg to actually start getting. Okay. So, before any of you get your knickers in a bunch, I'm going to preface this by saying that this is completely my own interpretation, and it's probably extremely fucking wrong given that I don't really have many story details from any of the 6 other games. Some details are also just me filling in the blanks and aren't really grounded in any form of evidence or anything like that. That being said, fuck you, my interpretation is objectively correct. So, sometime in the 1980s, two restaurants open up under the same company, Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Early in the company's life, a guy called Fritz Smith gets hired to record training tapes for use of the Springlock animatronic suits that use a special spring mechanism to both function as animatronics and also be worn as suits. It seems unnecessarily dangerous to me, but again, it was the 80s. Late one evening, Fritz is driving home from work when he catches sight of a young kid standing outside Fredbear's looking in the window. For reasons unknown to all but himself, he lures and kills the child, probably dumping the body near the diner. This incident leads to a wave of somewhat justified public backlash, and Fredbear's is shut down, with the special Springlock Freddy and Bonnie suits from that location being moved back into Fazbear's and put into storage, generally just leading to them being retired. Fritz, who got away with murder, is reassigned to security supervisor at this time. Come 1987, and Fazbear's has undergone a bit of a corporate makeover, tossing the old animatronics into the back room for spare parts and introducing the new toy animatronics. For the grand opening week, Jeremy Fitzgerald joins as the new night watchman, while Fritz, who serves as both the supervisor and the day shift guard, leaves tapes to talk to him throughout the night. Over the course of the week, Fritz's urges kick in once more, and he lures and kills 5 more children around the restaurant, hiding 4 of them in the old withered animatronics and the 5th in the yellow springlock Freddy. These incidents lead up to the animatronics beginning to act up more and more, while Jeremy just keeps on trucking. At the end of the week, Jeremy is transferred to the day shift for one last birthday party before the place closes for a thorough police investigation. It's probably at this party where the bite of 87 happened, and Jeremy was either a witness to it or the victim. As for who did it, I don't know, probably transgender Foxy. Meanwhile, Fitz fills in for the night shift that evening, and getting spooked from all that's going on and probably realising that the animatronics might be onto him, he decides to try and dismantle them, but completely fails. This leads to him being heavily reprimanded, and with that, the restaurant closes for good. In the interim, Fritz is arrested for the murders, but is cleared of all charges. Come 1993, and a new location has since opened up. Destitute and desperate, Fitz is reapplied to the company, and with a shortage of good staff, they rehire him, although in the far lower position of a simple night guard. After a little while, Mike Schmidt, who may or may not know more than he lets on about the company's history, also joins up, and Fritz falls back into old habits of recording tapes for him, while these ones aren't sanctioned by the company. After surviving a near-death experience and seeing that Mike is probably catching on to things, Fritz returns to the restaurant at the end of Mike's shift and succeeds in taking apart the animatronics for good. However, before he can get any further, the spirits of the dead children corner him and force him to hide in the yellow Bonnie suit for protection from them. This, as it turns out, is a really bad idea and leads to him being crushed by the spring locks accidentally triggering, leaving him to bleed out slowly and painfully. He's found by the owners of Frazbear's the next day, and for whatever godforsaken reason, they elect to cover it up, writing him off the dead and sealing him away in the back room, before blaming Mike for the destroyed animatronics and promptly sacking him. Not long after, the company goes bankrupt and the location is left to rot. 30 years later, a group of retarded entrepreneurs do what retarded entrepreneurs do best and buy up old Fazbear assets to create a new haunted house attraction based on the murders. After putting it together, they hire a new night guard to watch over the attraction. Mike, sensing that something is seriously off about all this, takes the job in order to keep an eye on things. After Mike's first shift, the entrepreneurs find Fritz's body inside the yellow Bonnie suit, and being retarded entrepreneurs, they use it as part of the attraction. This reveals that Fritz is, in fact, clinging to life and attempts to locate the escape zone. Christ, I'm getting loopy. Attempts to escape the location. After a week of this crap, Mike throws his hands up, says enough is enough, and burns down the whole attraction, killing Fritz for good and bringing an end to the path of destruction he wrought. With everything coming to an end, the tortured souls of the children can finally rest easy, their murderer burning in hell. I did tell you I used to write fanfiction. The Five Nights at Freddy's trilogy is an interesting beast. They aren't the best made games in the world, they don't have the most thrilling narratives or riveting gameplay, but there's something really special about them that most games could never hope to replicate. There's a charm to them, a thick atmosphere that really strikes at the imagination. It pretty much jump-started the whole genre of independent horror games into the mainstream, and proved that you don't need to have a flashy budget or gripping characters, or really do anything that exceptional in order to stick in people's minds. It created a phenomenon, and as much as people who haven't bathed in a decade rail on Scott for his wacky storytelling, or his sometimes shoddy coding or his political views, I have a lot of respect for the guy, and I hope he enjoys his semi-retirement. I just find this all inherently funny. FNAF is like the scrappy underdog. Even when it's totally inane and retarded and does stuff that pisses me off, I can't help but like it a lot. And that was really the point of this video. It isn't a perfect trilogy or anything, but it speaks to me personally, and I just wanted an excuse to talk about it a bit. These games made a lot of childhoods, and continue to influence culture even today, so easy as it is to dismiss them as random disposable crap with a rabid fanbase, you can't really deny how much of an effect they've had. And I think it's just cool that such a pop culture juggernaut could come from one guy with basically no budget and a couple of really neat ideas. Scott's story is really inspiring to me. He's not a jerk-off who went right into indie success out of college. He's barely younger than my dad, and something about that just makes him come off as really down-to-earth and humble, when compared to guys like Toby Fox and Jonathan Blow, who make good games, but can often come off as a little aloof and pretentious. Scott's like the everyman of the feel-good sports movie about game development. Even the fact that he could now buy Pakistan like 4 times over hasn't seemed to erode his nature. And You know, not to be your English teacher or anything like that, but he really sort of embodies that idea of the American dream. He came from a humble place and took over the whole damn world, and he never really lost himself while doing it. What the fuck? Why am I sucking this guy's cock so much? I think I've kind of said everything I want to say in the matter, so I guess I'm out. Have a good one.